All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And today we are going back to the future, all the way back to 2015. And we're going to unpack whether the concepts that we talked about back then, are they evergreen? Do they still apply today? We're excited to do that. What else are we going to cover, Ben?
Well, Bryson, what's making property news? Hang around to the end because I'm going to also help unpack what people say about why they invest in property.
Why do people invest in property, Ben? We're about to find out. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. Welcome back to you too, mate. How are you?
Good, mate. Very good. You?
Very good. Hey, look, we've had a lot of perhaps negative things to say about the state of Victoria over the last little journey, but one thing that we can be super grateful about living in Victoria, mate, is we get a public holiday for a horse race, which was a couple of days ago. So how did you spend your public holiday, mate?
Yeah, well, the race that stops the nation.
Yeah.
How did I spend it? I was on a plane. Well, I spent it overseas and I was on a plane on the way home.
Oh, mate, it would have been hard for you to find the race. You probably had other things to do, but clearly it's a short week that we've got here, Ben. For some people, it's a long, long weekend. Other people,
Yes.
that's in Victoria, that is. For the rest of the country,
Well,
they went to
now
work
that
as
the
normal on
schools
Tuesday.
pretty much put a correction day on the Monday. It does, more effort for the parents with the kids home for another 4-day spell.
Yeah, exactly. So there you go. There's a little bonus for all the Victorian listeners. But hey, before we get into today's show, Ben, just want to do what will be the last summer series shout out for me for this year. We've got one spot left. So I'm just letting folks know if you want to go to thepropertycouch.com.au/my story. Stiggy's been sifting through and we've received some rippers. So, Ben, one spot left. So if you don't act on that little urge that's in your tummy right now that says, yep, I want to tell my story, I think it can help some people, you'll have to wait 18 months. Well, I embellished a little bit there. It's probably 12 and a bit months, but a long time you got to wait to come and share your story. So, folks, I'd love for you to do that. Thepropertycouch.com.au/my story. We're about to go into summer series, and it is a wonderful part of the year. We want to share your stories today. Hey, Ben, today is I'm going to do my Mindset Minute theme as a way to set up what we are going to talk about today. Okay,
Sounds good.
So I'm going to riff off a few quotes from some famous folks who've got some philosophies around reading. First one is, the more that you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you'll go. Okay, so that was, of course, the famous Dr. Seuss from his book, I Can Read With My Eyes Shut, which was first published in 1978. And it's one of his many works that promote the joy of reading and learning. So that's number one. Number two, this is from the 33rd President of the United States, Harry S. Truman. He says, not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. Okay, let that one land. And then the third one here is, of course, wouldn't be right if we didn't have an Uncle Warren quote. He says this: read 500 pages every day. This is how knowledge works. It builds up like compound interest. All of you can do it, but I guarantee not many of you will do it. Okay? So the question I want to ponder to you, Ben, is reading enough? Okay? So we've got three prominent people: a president, one of the most famous investors in the world, and of course Dr. Seuss, who's the author of, or the star of a lot of books, including The Cat in the Hat, right? But I'm going to pose that you're going to get more out of reading one book that's great 5 times than you are from reading 5 ordinary books. And this is where the pursuit of mastery exists. So I want to delineate between reading versus active reading and making sure that you land what's going on here. So if you read one book that's great 5 times, we're going to argue that that's better than reading 5 ordinary books, right? So you say it every week, Ben, knowledge is empowering, but it's only empowering if you act on it. And acting on it requires understanding. And understanding requires going a little deeper than just simply exposure to some concepts, right? You need mastery. You need to reread. You need to re-listen. You need to re-watch. You need to re-chat until you get it right. So it led me to think about what are some of the books, Ben, you might have some that I've given you no notice on this, so you might think as I'm reading through, some of the books that I've read more than once. And so Morgan Housel, The Psychology of Money, I quote Morgan a lot on this podcast, and I'm forever grateful that you nudged me on that book. I've read a book by Napoleon Hill called Outwitting the Devil, which has got nothing really to do with spirituality. It's just a conversation about human behavior and how to get elite performance out of yourself. Read that multiple times, Ben. Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I reckon I'm up to 4 on that. Josh Kaufman's got a book called The Personal MBA because I love business and understands all the concepts. I probably read that a couple of times, maybe into the 3rd, and I reference it lots.
Yeah, it's a reference to that one.
It's a great one. So Don Miguel Ruiz has a book called The 4 Agreements. I reckon I'm on 4th lap of that on the audio book. Russell Brunson has a book, Expert Secrets, on how to craft stories and tell better stories and how to understand how to share those stories with the community that you want to build. Jamin, who we've had on the podcast, he's got a book called Elegantly Simple Solutions to Complex People Problems. I'm probably on 4th read of that. And then Robert Cialdini or Cialdini or however you say Robert's final surname, Ben, has got a book called Influence. And that's a tough book to get through. So I reckon I'm on the 2nd one for that. Definitely in the 2nd lap. So, and then there's a bunch of podcast episodes that I listen to over and over because I mind map everything, Ben. Books that I love, I mind map them. Conversations that I want to remember, I mind map them. If there's a course that I'm going through, I mind map it because it's the way I structure my mind so that I can easily recall the bigger patterns that are going on. So why am I banging on here, Ben? Why am I banging on about this? It's because simply reading books is not enough. It's actually absorbing the content that's in the book. So if you have come across a book that you like or come across a resource that you like, we want to suggest that you lean in. So that's my long segue, Ben, into what I want to do with you today. And we've got another one planned in a couple of weeks' time, is I want to do a Throwback Thursday compilation. Throwback Thursday with you, Ben, where you and I actually go back and revisit the past and have a look at some of the concepts that we've talked about that are intuitive, ingrained, part of the DNA of the conversations that you and I have on this podcast, the conversations we have with our team and the conversations that we have with our clients. But we want to make sure that we revisit some of the fundamentals that need to be revisited, Ben, so we can go a bit deeper and so that our community can get it. So you up for the ride, mate?
Yeah, Bryce, I'm really looking forward to unpacking this story in terms of we've done a lot of great stuff in those early years, so it's going to be a lot of fun in terms of just revisiting some of those earlier key points and key takeaways.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to try and get through a couple of episodes here, but just the key takeaways that we're going to riff on, talk to the concepts, Ben. I think what we'll do is go, okay, everything we like to do is evergreen, so it works today as much as it did the day that it came out of our mouth. So we can speak to the evergreen nature of it, and in some cases, our audience relies and hopes that we continue to grow and evolve as well over the journey. So we'll also make a point where we think that there might be a tweak.
Yeah, 100%.
Concepts that we know in the time. So let's rip into it. The first one was super fun. The episode title was "We Fix Bad Property Investment Advice," which some people may say lacks a little bit of hubris there, Ben. But stick with us. We'll talk that through. Here's the date, Ben. 23rd of February, 2015. 2015 is a little while ago. And here's the key concepts we talked about. We talked about barbers. We talked about the 2 common regrets, and we talked about who you seek your advice from. But we can't kick this off without first revisiting the barbershop analogy, Ben. It's so fundamental to it. It is the cornerstone analogy for this entire podcast. So I'll set it up and then I'll get you to give some feedback on it, right? So the idea was this, that someone who'd been operating a barbershop that was cutting hair for $25 per haircut for several years, established player, lots of clientele. And all of a sudden, when the shop next door came available, they noticed some movement and some activity. Someone else take up the opportunity to run a business there. And lo and behold, what did they do? They opened A barber shop, right? So here's a vendor who's been there for 20 plus years doing $25 haircuts. And what does the new vendor do, Ben? They put a big sign out the front, little A-frame that says $10 haircuts. So the point of the story is this: what does the established player who's been in this market for some time do in response to someone who's clearly doing a price cut on what they have been doing for some time, which is going to get them to compromise on their quality? What do they do to respond? Well, a lot of people would say, well, we're going to have to match the $10 haircuts, but no, this person doesn't do that. They put their own A-frame out the front and it says $25 haircuts. We fix $10 haircuts. and we've got to let that land, because the person who gets a $10 haircut and then goes to the barber next door later to get it fixed, Ben, ends up paying $35 for a haircut. So that is the cornerstone fundamental analogy of this entire podcast and our industry, and it's sort of set the sail for you and I. Here we are 8 years later, from that very fundamental story, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, because ultimately the story in property investing is around spruikers who don't charge for their service. So they say it's a free service to you because ultimately they're getting significant commissions from selling a developer's product. So those commissions these days can range anything from $25,000 right through to $50,000. So ultimately the customer pays. And our view on that, as we've unpacked since February of 2015, is how many people have we heard stories from, Bryce, who are like, yeah, I bought something off the plan, or I bought a house and land package and it hasn't performed well. Well, we always had the view that we're here to help fix their thinking around investing and making sure that they made smarter decisions around what to buy. And so that's ultimately the story here. In fact, Bryce, here's a little story for you. Last Friday, I was walking back from a meeting back to the office, and down the road, there's a little pop-up wine shop, and his A-frame says cheap wine. And so I just couldn't help myself, right? I couldn't help myself. So I went in there. I've never been in this pop-up shop before. I said, can I speak to the owner? And they're going, yeah, sure. And I just said, hey, your A-frame outside. Can I give you some advice in terms of, how to fix your A-frame? And he said, sure, because it says cheap wine. I said, no one wants to buy cheap wine. What they want to buy is good wine cheap. So in terms of getting the value story right. And so ultimately,
sale, yes.
Yeah, right. So it still might be really good wine. So you've got to let everyone know it's good wine, but no one wants to drink cheap wine. They want good wine cheap. So it sort of just, highlights to people in terms of our story, and what we're trying to do is there's no substitute for value. It's how you ultimately pay for that value. And if someone can demonstrate that the wine is good, or in terms of that the property investment advice is good, but you can't get good property investment advice if you're selling from a stock list. Like ultimately, first of all, it's limited in the selection in terms of what you do. And secondly, we've proven to people before that ultimately, if you put a side-by-side investment property next to each other, and one is new and one is secondhand, the secondhand one will outperform because the secondhand one has more land value in it than the new one does. So it's clearly mathematically non-probable that the new property will outperform the existing property, all things being equal. So from that point of view, it's just another little, a push in the right direction in terms of how you get educated, coming back to your intro.
So if I think about what I was thinking 8 years ago, so that the 2015 version of me and the 2023 version of me, I probably was a little bit ignorant at the time, or naive, that I figured as soon as we told that story, Ben, that would be the end of people being dudded by wrong advice and doing the wrong thing, because we have now, I can't quote it directly, but we've talked about the barbershop analogy a number of times. And the amount of times that people have come up to us and said, hey, listen, this is what I'm considering. What do you think? And I am a podcast listener, kind of reinforces my Mindset Minute theme about exposure is not enough. Because even if you've heard the concepts that we talk about, and again, this is a naivety from me, I figured once we'd told the people the information, and once they heard it, it would sink in and it was done, job was done. But I guess, which is the theme of this Throwback Thursday today, is we want to reinforce some of these fundamental points that if you if you are interested in having your haircut fixed, not only will you pay the original price of $25, but you'll also pay the original $10 that you threw away as a result of trying to take a shortcut. Or in some cases, for some people, they didn't really know that they were getting the wrong sort of haircut until after the experience. But we've been passionate. We've set a journey. We've turned up every Thursday as a result of that one analogy, folks. So we want to make sure that one lands for you to make sure you get it right. Now, another thing that we spoke about in that first episode, Ben, which has been a recurring theme, and at the time we didn't know how much this was going to be impacting our life, but the two most common regrets that we hear people say is, number one, I wish I didn't sell insert address suburb of a property that they'd had in their previous history that they wish they still had their hands on. And then someone else saying, and you'll see it in our reviews too, Ben, I wish I had found this earlier. I wish I had started earlier. I wish I had made sure I took that first step earlier. And so that's the second regret. I wish I had started earlier.
And that's why we spend a lot of time on mindset around that. Wish I should have started earlier, to build confidence, to make the invisible visible, to build that, I can't be what I can't see. So make sure that people understand that it's possible for them based on their story. So that's where we do a lot of that unpacking around cash flow analysis and borrowing power, and before we do anything around asset selection and strategy. So number one, but the big one here, Bryce, the one I want to double click on right now, because we have, fast forward to today, we have a situation now where interest rates are where they are, and that is making, cost of living pressures and holding on to that property harder than ever. And I'm sort of saying to people, do whatever you can. Do whatever you can, because to Bryce's point, he always talks about this thing shall pass, and it will. The cycle will correct itself as the economy slows, and then, ultimately we get interest rates coming back down. If you can ride out that period of time, and let's call it the next 12 months, by doing anything you possibly can to hold on to it, then you are going to be in significantly better shape. You get no compounding interest on zero value. Just remember that. You get no compounding interest on zero value. So the moment you're holding on to that asset, and think about the recycle cost if you want to come back in later on. So do whatever you can to hold on to that property. Do not sell, is my advice to people, if they can, because that's going to be really valuable for you over the course of the next 10 or 20 years.
But if you reflect on what we had exposed to us at the time, 23rd of February 2015, things that were going to happen in the future that we did not even ponder in our mind could have happened. There was no way at the 23rd of February 2015 did I think that our world would have been stopped by a pandemic. I thought they were stories that you read about in the past with the Spanish flu and stuff that happened to people in the past that just wouldn't happen to us. And of course that happened. I never thought that we would have an event like Brexit happening. If you think about all of those things that have happened in that 8 years, Ben, as we were standing at that microphone, actually it was Stiggy's phone at this point in time because we were recording on a phone, that has happened. But the price, how many people who are listening to this podcast right now would love to go back and buy some real estate at 2015's prices? I don't think there's anyone who's seriously a student of our podcast who wouldn't just blindly go and put their name on titles. Probably even Spruker stock men back then, right? Wouldn't have performed as well, but you probably, as a result of the pandemic, you had a once in a lifetime event that rose all ships. So here's the real hard part for people to do. If they go, let's fast forward another 8 years, Ben. So what does that make us 2031? There's probably a lot of people who'll be listening to the podcast go, there's not a single person who wouldn't love to go back and pay 2023 prices.
100%. Well said, mate. Well said.
Here we are with those opportunities. Now, the third key concept that came out of this first episode, Ben, was the concept of enthusiastic amateurs. I'll give the backstory on this. My first experience with a business, I'm not going to say names, but my first experience with a business was effectively a bunch of enthusiastic amateurs running around on the leadership of someone who'd been there and done that before us. And I remember the general manager who came into that business said he's never seen anything like it. Just the fact that there are so many enthusiastic amateurs running around getting people to be interested in properties. And it landed on me. I'm thinking, isn't that interesting? And it's not till later that story landed where I go, I have a history, Ben. I've put it in the book. I've said it on this podcast. For new people to our podcast, they might not be aware of this, but I was what would be considered a spruiker. My very first experience was helping investors on that side of the fence. But here's the deal, Ben. I hand on heart thought I was doing the right thing. I promise you, with every being in my heart, I thought I was doing the right thing. So that qualified me as a very enthusiastic person, but it didn't hide the fact that I was an amateur. I had an accounting degree. I was working at a chartered accounting firm in West Perth. I was doing tax returns for property investors that I love doing. But I had such a journey to learn more stuff back then, which was back in 1998. So enthusiastic amateurs. So here is the other concept that we want to land here. Sometimes the people that you're dealing with can be on one of two sides of the fence. The first one is they can be knowingly trying to get you into something that's not in your best interest. Or you could be on the other side of the fence, Ben, where there's people who think that they're trying to do the right thing and they're unknowingly getting you into the wrong type of property.
Yeah, and if I put the two different professional layers in front of a consumer, I can tell you that those who get paid big commissions in selling these properties are probably earning almost double what a professional property investment advisor would be earning. By way of example, if they're good at selling, and
At
that's
least
exactly
double.
what they're doing, versus advising and giving tailored solution for each customer, there is not as much money in it for them. I promise you, they get they're a fee for service, and they certainly aren't earning the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so those people, they make peace with however they make peace in terms of how they make their money. I'm in sales, and that's exactly how the world looks. But those people like yourself, Bryce, who has a conscience, and you work out once you've realised, hey, hang about, I want the best outcome for the customer, and I'm willing to do that. You basically take the right pathway in terms of how you advise people. So that's the outcome of being an enthusiastic amateur. And as you build up that skill and as you build up that knowledge, the right pathway is usually through advising clients in terms of making smart decisions about where the land is, what the existing property that sits on it, and what's the productive use of that land, and how's it going to grow over time.
Then it becomes this point in the road, Ben. It's a fork in the road, and it becomes a pride versus profit. Because once you know, you can't unknow that, right? So this was 2006, where I drew a line in the sand. I'd reached the fork in the road, and I'd realised, hey, listen, there is another alternative here. And to your point, Ben, there was a significant change in the amount of remuneration that was on offer, right? But if I wanted to sleep at night and I wanted to stay true to my own values around helping people, I needed to tread the path that was pride versus the profit path. And look, to be honest, Ben, with the information that you and I know on how to get people interested in property and the ability to use property as a vehicle, we could quite easily use that knowledge to sell out a big subdivision. We could a big off the plan apartment tower. And if you looked at the maths, the amount of revenue compensation that you and I could get would be nothing short of extraordinary. But at the end of the day, it's at what expense? And you and I both, which is why we've been mates for a long time, why we've been able to do this for a long time, is because we both share the same view that you need to help other people get what they want. So, which is a concept that we did in this episode, Ben. And it's a quote, and it's a Zig Ziglar quote. It says, "You get everything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want." And I've thought about that as I was writing these notes, Ben, because I actually think Zig's done the right thing by saying that's what you do, because quite often we as humans are self-interested. So you got to put the self-interest first, which is you get everything you want in life, comma, if you just help enough other people get what they want. And I'll be honest and transparent, I've used that as a motivator early days, but now I'd actually think about it in the flip, right? If you just help enough other people get what they want, you get everything you want in life. If you actually lead with the other people first, Ben, the other becomes a byproduct of that rather than being the drive at the beginning. And if I started with that as the motivator and it's now been flipped, I promise you, folks, that the joy the absolute joy that we get from seeing other people implement the frameworks we've talked about since the 23rd of February 2015, implement it, get the job done, make a significant difference. It's why we get so much joy as we lead into summer series. It is, if I hark back to the Tony Robbins stuff, Ben, the two spiritual needs that we have are growth and contribution, because we've got certainty, uncertainty, love and connection, and significance. They're the needs of the flesh, but the spiritual ones are growth and contribution. So if you flip Zig Ziglar's quote around and you go, if you just help enough other people get what they want in life, you'll get everything you want in life. That comes from that growth.
Mate, I love it. I reckon that's awesome. That's the perfect walk a mile, see a mile reframing that gets you into the right head position, which is exactly the way the world should be. You can serve and help others. Yeah, good things happen to you.
But folks, I've only got that over time. I've only got that from walking the talk here, because I'll be, as I said, I was self-interested at first, but I actually get what I want if I flip it around. Hey, we used the word unpack in that episode, Ben. That became a theme for some time. So interesting that we used to.
Still today, we use it on certain projects. I think we've got it on a course now as well.
Do you remember in the first 100, Ben, how we used to be really proud of ourselves when we go unpack? We're just going to unpack this, like as if it was just this new thing. Now we're like, oh, well, we used to say that a lot. We probably went over the top. All right, episode 2, Ben, if we pivot. The title was Regulation versus Education. It first went to air on the 6th of March, 2015. And here's the meta themes or the concepts that we talked about. Self-education, which property to buy, and should you be advised or convinced, is some of the stuff that we talked about, Ben. But what were some of the key concepts that we chatted about in episode 2?
Well, some of those concepts were, education, need for both property investors and also for advisors. I mean, ultimately, if you want to be taking advice from someone who has studied just a handbook and not necessarily been out in the field, sort of seeing exactly what is needed from a behavioural as well as a maths point of view. So it's science and art is the message here in terms of understanding that. So building that education fought up, I suppose, in terms of, and building layers upon layers in terms of your knowledge there. That was one of them. You must educate yourself to succeed in this game. So we always talk about if you're getting advice from somebody, make sure you're educated enough to be asking informed questions. Now, they should hopefully have a greater amount of subject knowledge than you do. If they do it every day, think about it, as part of years of developing up their experience and their knowledge. But you also need to have enough competency to be in the conversation and comprehend those things. And that's why I always say there's no such thing as a silly question, because you should always be asking as many questions as possible to build up that baseline knowledge. Number 3 is not every property is created equal. Okay, that's, when we first started to talk about our big story here, and I mentioned it earlier around established versus new and its performance there. And at the time, back in 2015, student accom was the sort of next big thing. Now, if I think about all the thing that sort of comes, from that went from student accom, because that was all about cash flow. Then it went to granny flats, and then granny flats then went into NRAS properties, and then NRAS properties went into, now they're, the flavour of the month is NDIS opportunities. So you can see there will always be new innovation into the marketplace in terms of ways to encourage you. Oh, and don't forget SMSF, in terms of being able to borrow. So think about all of those things that weren't around in 2015. So the big story there was, everyone chasing cash flow out of student accommodation as part of that. And finally, in wrapping out the key concepts, we talked about the difference between advising versus convincing, which was obviously the lead story in terms of the actual title of the ep.
So if we could rewind again, Ben, so we're trying to create that juxtaposition between the conversation you and I are having today versus the conversation we had back then. When we did that episode, there wasn't a lot of podcasts. Now there's scores of podcasts, right?
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of webinars. So the information that was available was low. The barrier to get access to it was high. That's probably a better way to say it. We had a couple of magazines at the time, and then those magazines had people putting in lots of advertisements in to try and entice people. So the magazine was largely the number one source in the country for getting easy access to the information. So what we were trying to do at this time, Ben, is, we put regulations versus education. You were there with the mouthpiece going, you need to have not only the advisor giving you the right information, and they need to have a minimum standard of service, which you were saying become a QPIA. But we were also saying at the time going, and folks, you can outsource the execution, but you can't outsource the understanding. And we were really stamping our feet loudly to go, folks, we need you to understand. And bear in mind, we're only 2 episodes in here on a mission that we were trying to, here we are with a body of work behind us. But then, Ben, we only had a body of work of 1 episode behind us at that point in time.
Yeah.
And we're waving our hands around a lot, and we're doing the property expos, and we're trying to contribute to the magazines where we could. But the speed at which people can get their information now in 2023 is so short. But back then, the runway was long to try and land a message and get people to get it. So you were definitely in this episode trying to say, folks, there's 2 responsibilities here. If you're an advisor, you've got a foundational responsibility to make sure that you have some form of integrity in the information you're giving. But you're also saying to the folks, just in case your advisor doesn't have that foundational understanding, you have to make sure that you understand it.
Yeah, look, what the amount of content that you consume now is exponential compared to what you can consume back in those times, and everyone's looking for an angle, everyone's looking for a position in the market. So there's lots of different sort of, don't use a buyer's agent, use a buyer's agent. Don't buy new, buy existing. Buy new, don't buy existing, and they have their claims and their angles, and all trying to find a cut through to get the attention of potential customers. I mean, make no mistake, in terms of these days, the only reason why people are doing podcasts is that they want leads into their business. They're selling you something in terms of what that looks like. So now, of course, we've got to say here, we've run an advisory business, but we were running that advisory business from 2007 before we actually started to do more broad education broadcasting, effectively, is what we were doing, so we could get our message out there further, because that was part of, we see so many people doing dumb things with money, and so many bad decisions being made around investing. So we wanted to basically broadcast that there. But now that the angles have been all about myth busting, or they're wrong. So there's a lot of that sort of conflict that's going on. But just make no mistake, it's all about them wanting to sell you something, in terms of the fundamental evergreen principles of property investing, in terms of buy a great asset and hold it for the long term and live off the passive income and create the capital. That is evergreen. Nothing will stop that forever. In terms of how you do that, and how active you want to be in terms of the productive use of that land in 20 or 30 years' time to turn 1 into 2 or 1 into 3 or whatever that looks like, that is an opportunity for you. But if you buy 3 or 4 really good properties and hold them for the long term, which we've been pretty consistent about since day one, that's not going to change. And I think that's, they're the core messages that I would say to people. You don't necessarily, because the whole idea of the reason why they do these, want to get an edge and an advantage, is they want to, we've made this much profit. Everyone's looking for an easy and quick way to wealth, Bryce. Everyone. And so there will always be enough people that will be suckered in to that message of quick, instant wealth, as opposed to boringly slow, passive. And we won't change our course. We are ultimately going to be here saying the same things about boring, reliable, long-term growth. Everyone else will try their little tactics on the side and, look at the return we got for this particular client and work off these elevated returns and, claims that may not even be substantiated. We'll just boringly go about educating our community and making sure that they're making their money work as hard as it can for them.
Well, yes. And here's how naive I was back then, Ben, in 2015, just to show people that we didn't do it to get leads. Because you're right, we have a business and we've been able to help people, and clearly people who resonate with us on the podcast, for those who want help, come and see our business. So we're not denying that. But back then, I was so naive, Ben. I was actually concerned, because content was very much in its infancy back then. You know, we were doing a lot of pioneering stuff back there, both with our video production and with our audio production. I actually thought it would be a bad thing for our business. I thought if you gave away all the secrets, no one would want to come and talk to you. And so
you weren't the only one thinking, well, wait a minute, that's our intellectual property. I mean, that's the stuff that our customers are paying for.
yeah.
Yeah.
Location does 80% of the heavy lifting. You now hear everyone talking about that, right? But back then that was different. That was stuff. And so, but then what you realise, Ben, over the journey, and I hope that this part of the message lands to someone who's listening to this. It's actually not the knowledge that you need to, like, we need to be worried about. We're trying to do everything we can to affect the behaviour, because it's 80% to do with science and 20% to do with the science and 80% to do with the behaviour. Did not know that back then, Ben. Did not know that. I thought it was going to be the end of our business. We just said, let's just do this and let's just help people, and we'll keep an eye on it to see if our business just shuts the doors because no one needs any help anymore. But that's how naive we were, folks, around podcasts being a marketing move. Just saying, just for the record. So here's a couple of quotes, and one there's 3 quotes, and I know that you want to really lean into one of these, Ben. But here's direct quotes from that episode back in 2015, right? So Marty McFly takes us into gets the flux capacitor, Ben, into the away we go.
The DeLorean, off we go.
The DeLorean. So we said this: the time to buy quality assets, it's when it's a depressed market. This is a buyer's market. So back then, Ben, we were even trying to tell people that counter-cyclical is good. Wealth creation through residential properties, this is your quote, is entirely possible, but you must educate yourself and work with smart professionals. So even back then, you were trying to get them on the track. But what about this one, Ben? There's a bit of updating to do here. There's a strong correlation between income and property prices. This hits into economic activity, human interest, and human behaviour, which we will discuss in later episodes. Boy, did we discuss it in later episodes, Ben.
And are we still discussing it today? Hey, I'll pick up on the first one, though. I think there's a little quick story to tell around that depressed counter-cyclical buying. I mean, if you look at Warren Buffett's Uncle Warren's essays, he likes to buy great businesses at fair value, right? And so ultimately, the concept there is really simple, that if you're going to go into certain markets that offer you good value, then you will buy when others are fearful, and that'll be greedy. So that's the concept in terms of what that looks like. So we've always been consistent around wanting to buy, long-term markets like Melbourne and Sydney. They are the markets where the majority of wealth is created and incomes are significantly strong, for a bulk of the marketplace that then drive those values. So that hasn't changed. What did evolve is we got more scientific around supply and demand and looking for markets that had that probability of short-term growth for some clients who needed that equity boost straight away, in terms of looking at that. So that has been an evolution in terms of introducing both counter-cyclical in terms of buying when others are fearful, and that will play out again as these interest rates stay a little bit higher for a little bit longer. So there will be some tremendous buying opportunities, I suspect, later this year and certainly into 2024. But then, let's come back to that final point. I mean, in terms of strong correlation between income and property prices. So it's very clear, everyone, this is unrefutable in terms of what's true. So if you look at irrefutable. Thank you. Irrefutable, my bad. In terms of land values in certain areas around developed cities. So why is it that land values closer to the city, so if we just do sort of a very simplistic example, an 800 square metre flat block 2 kilometres from a city, right? And we're talking about a developed city, not a town, developed city, versus 40 kilometres away. Why is it that land value, considering it's serving exactly the same purpose of putting a dwelling on top of it, so let's say it's a single-use dwelling, why is it that, as an absolute minimum case, that the land value is 3 times higher? What is it? What makes that land value 3 times higher than the land value that might be 40 kilometres out? And in some cases, it's 5. Some cases, it's 7. Some cases, it's 10 times more in terms of as you move around the city and well, that is the whole story of what economics is. It's the measurement an understanding of human interest, human behavior, and how people react and how they value those types of assets. So when you put all of that infrastructure around it, the lifestyle drivers, the amenity, and also that human biological need to be associated and mingling with like-minded people who we want to break bread with, and all of those things, that is the intrinsic value that you see in terms of seeing those land values grow in those areas. And so I've got greater amenity, I've got greater flexibility, I've got greater convenience, and people put a price on that land in that particular location. So that tells you in terms of the economic rules around how these things work from a sustainable point of view. And that's the endurance of long-term return, as opposed to what we've always talked about, short-term demand and supply. That is what's measuring, interest in value over the short term. But what sustains that, the essential long-term growth that you're going to get out of property, is fundamentally around the productive use of the land and the attraction and demand and scarcity of that land. And that's it. So we're consistent in terms of what that message looks like, and ultimately, if you make an argument for that block, 40 kilometres from the city, how do you make the argument that that's going to have the infrastructure or the amenity around it that's going to sustain that when everything comes from the centre? And yes, you will have satellite cities and sub-cities like, what we've got in terms of Sydney, where you've got, North Sydney as an example, or you've got Crow's Nest, or you've got Parramatta, where these sort of sub-centres are being built up around. But and so you will have areas like Strathmore, which sort of borders on both accessing the main CBD, but also now bordering or getting access to Parramatta. So it's those types of nuances that are going to make that land value continue to grow. And we also know that the ripple effect is also true. So coming back to the question around income versus property prices, what's evolved there in our thinking is it's wealth, okay? Wealth and land value, land to asset ratio. That has been the evolution of our thinking here, because what you'll also understand around income is as we build wealth and as the power of compound ultimately grows, we can also be quite informed in terms of how we manage our tax affairs and how we manage our money. So you will see, for instance, that if I have a certain structure around me, I can manage how I deliver income and how I declare income. So when you sort of see ATO income levels of people in certain areas, you've also got to remember, if they're running a small business, they could have had retained profits inside the company and not delivered any of those profits out. So you can manufacture and control the amount of income that flows into certain households. So just looking at household income alone is not enough. What you now need to be looking at is basically the overall wealth of a household, and that's obviously hard to measure in terms of the way in which we can control the flow of income and what we disclose as our income. So then that direct correlation between income and property prices is a little bit harder to make that strong connection.
Yeah, so that's where the science comes in too, Ben, because you've got to look at the demographics of the particular suburb to work out if they're more likely to work for someone else versus being able to work for themselves or have influence around their income, to your point around structures. So, but there's definitely a correlation between the people who have the most resources and the property. And so those resources in some suburbs are reflected by the amount of income they have. In other areas, it's reflected by perhaps the income's not as strong, to your point, Ben. But I guess ultimately, I think another evolution that we've observed over the journey since we've published these back in 2015, Ben, was we actually ended up confusing some people who would listen to these episodes maybe 6 or 7 years later when the market had moved, because back then there was such an opportunity to still stay close to the CBDs. Even a lot of the gentrification that happened on the western side of both the two metropolises in Australia and on the west coast in Perth, and the same in Adelaide. Those gentrifications weren't as mature as, fast forward to 2023. A lot of that gentrification in those areas is very much mature, right? So it's about being as close as you can to these big cities, but we need to adapt. And so then it becomes close to the satellite cities. But when you're overlaying the information that we shared in those early episodes right now into 2023, they still apply around human interest, human behaviour, and economic activity, right? So if you think about Geelong, that would sometimes confuse people. They go, hang on, but you're getting further and further away from the Melbourne CBD. Sure. But as you move further away, you're getting closer and closer to another satellite city with a bunch of other things that make, human interest and human behaviour for people that makes them tick. Same with the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast and Wollongong and the Central Coast and Mandurah and help me out here, Ben, Christie's Beach and all those places. As we move around the country, as you're getting further and further away from the headline act, which is the big capital city, which back then in 2015 we could still get super close to those. Now we've got to make sure we still have the same principles evolved in our thinking, so that we overlay those principles to where we're buying. They're still, where are they going to get the jobs? How are they going to get access to them? What are they going to do on the weekend? And the status test. Will my status go down? Will my status stay the same? Or importantly, if there's perception that your status will increase, that will also have an impact on the performance of the asset and the performance of the suburb.
Yeah, I think the other point is like, just never forget also, guys, I mean, that's an investment theory around the long-term capital growth of land and, the improvements on the land. But you always start with, what are we working with here? Like, so if we're working with a 20-something or 30-something and they've got a certain amount of income, that doesn't count you out of getting in property. We've always got to build a strategy around who we're working for and what their income story is. We still go back to the fundamentals of A, B, C, D in terms of how we build that story. So now for the millennials and the Gen Zs, yeah, it's potentially a different approach, because ultimately you can't sustain these, or raising the deposits are difficult, right? And then, being able to sustain the shortfalls on these higher value properties. So by, I think it's really important to understand, that was then, this is now. So the market has moved. So strategies for different sort of investors are real. We can cut a pathway for a particular investor in terms of their current situation. But if we get a, sort of early 40 something household, double household income on 450,000, make no mistake what we're buying. We're going to be going closer to the city, and we're going to be buying those scarcer assets that ultimately have owner-occupier appeal versus, because we also know with those types of customers, they're not going to want to have 6 or 7 or 8. They want this as a passive investment. They don't want to be active. They're working very hard. They're getting their pound of flesh for those people that they're earning that income from. So I think it's just a reminder for everyone. It is still horses for courses. But at that stage, to Bryce's point, we could buy within 5 kilometres of a CBD in 2015 for under sub 500 grand. Right now the world has changed. Those properties, sort of are floating in that sort of 1.3 to 1.5 range in terms of what we were buying back then to what we're buying now in terms of those, the houses.
The point being, folks, is in 2031, you look back and wish you could have bought the 2023 prices like we are talking about 2015. So the first episode we covered was fixing bad advice. The second episode, we covered the regulation versus education for yourself, and we're pioneering some of these new concepts that are now in the investment vernacular with everyone now, with the proliferation of content, Ben, which is nice to see some people picking up our information and running with it. And then the third episode, the title was The 4 Pillars of Mastery, Ben. This was the 13th of March in 2015. And we covered some meta concepts around the property investment formula. What was that? We made a big statement, Ben, that budgets don't work. Back then, that was big and bold. And we talked about grandma's money jars. But some of the key concepts in that episode was the 4 pillars of mastery around A for asset selection, B for borrowing power, C for cash flow management, and D for defence. That was pioneering stuff back then. Hopefully, that's been our contribution to the property investment landscape, Ben. We talked about there was a science behind investing. It's not just a transaction. We said it's a process, not an event. We also talked about of the A, B, C, D, that C comes first. Sadly, C wasn't first in the alphabet because that would have been nice for us, Ben, but we needed everyone to remember A, B, C, D, but C goes first. We talked about the narrative at the time leading up to that was debt, servicing debt to hold these properties. Whereas we reshifted it to talking about, okay, what surplus do you have at the end of your month that you can put towards that, and then a couple of other things. But where do you want to kick it off here, Ben?
Well, I think, there was some big foundational beliefs, what we started to unpack in those episodes were the approaches that we took in terms of providing professional advice. That these were our pillars around our investment principles, and we weren't going to waver from them in terms of, especially when you're playing with other people's money, right? So it's all well and good. You can sit here and I can talk about my multi-million-dollar property portfolio. Well, that's my money, that's my risk, that's my mindset. But when someone else is asking you to actually engage hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars of their money, it's a completely different ballgame, right? In terms of your responsibility. Sure, for yourself, something goes wrong, you can fix it. But when you're getting, a professional guide who's going to help you to get to this outcome, it's meaningful that you need to be consistent around your frameworks and basically how you treat and respect that money and how you put it to work. So we would build everything around that cash flow story, unpacking future plans and looking at the impact of that cash flow, and then start to putting the optimization to work, what borrowing power we could get to comfortably afford. We would obviously set higher interest rates. 7.25 was our long-term interest rate back in the day, just to give you some context. And then ultimately, once we knew that, then we would obviously use our fulfillment science in terms of taking action and what we'd go out and spot, negotiate and purchase for our customers. And then, now that we've got lots of debt, that first bit of defense was around the cash flow, but the second bit of defense was about how that cash flow is coming from the individual, and we need to now protect the biggest asset in any household that's starting to accumulate wealth, and that's the personal income of that person. So we'd start to look at income protection, life, trauma, TPD type insurances. That meant that if something went wrong, we wouldn't have to divest of that property and end up in a really bad place. So that really important, completing the circle around how you would set up for success when you're playing with other people's money was really important to us.
So this episode and the following three after that, we went through each of them: C, A, B, and D. So this one we lent heavily into the C, Ben. We're showing that comes first, but I want to lean, because we're trying to take a trip down memory lane and bring all of our listeners back to the thinking and the narrative and the landscape at the time. Because what I'd come out of was my initial exposure to the property investment world was definitely debt servicing debt. So what that meant is that you would actually build up a portfolio of assets, and then you would actually harvest some of the equity in it and spend the equity on lifestyle in the knowing that the portfolio would grow in value at a faster rate than your spend. So we talk about $2,000 a week, Ben. What that meant was adding $2,000 a week in debt to the portfolio, or more simply, borrow 100, spend it in a year, come back to the portfolio next year, borrow another 100. And so the theory at the time was, sure, you were actually using compounding in reverse because the interest payments were starting to capitalize and build up. But because you bought the right properties and because you had enough of them, so you had 7 properties and then you just kept turning them, the snowball would run at a faster rate than you were spending it. And so fast forward to now, Ben, it's thankful that the pivot happened back in 2015 because except for a very select few, that game can't be played anymore. The lending landscape's changed so much that if you had have had that strategy, you'd be stuffed.
Oh, the classic case of aggression in terms of higher risk, higher reward play. We're seeing a bit now. There's a lot of forced sellers in the property space because they've got too big of portfolios, and ultimately they can't service them. So they're having to trade down on those portfolios. So boringly predictable. Naturally built-in conservatism has always been the bedrock of the way in which we like to play the game, right? We don't want to take too many great risks. Now, some clients who would come to us would say, or prospective clients, I want this, I want to do this development, I want to do this, I want to build, I want 30. Well, we're just not the right advisory firm for you, right? It was just ultimately turning those people away. It's not where we want to be. So the only commitment we ask them to live up to is their spending habits. And so that's why we introduced Money Smarts. And that's why we talked about the state of the wallet plays with your state of mind. I have no doubt, and this was my biggest, thing for me. For 20 years, I worried about money. For 20 years, I worried about how much money I had. I don't worry about money at all now, right? I'm out the other side of this. I've been doing this for almost 30 years. So, that compounding story, that cash flow story is strong enough where I just don't have to worry about money. But that's the mindset piece that you were talking about. The behavior is hard. So, and still to this day, Bryce, one of the biggest things for me is, when we start to introduce the money smart system, is still a lot of people honestly believe that they manage their money well. And I mean, I don't know how they're benchmarking themselves or what system that they're using, but being solvent is not managing your money well. But the hard part for people is that, well, don't take away things that I enjoy. But the reality is that if you want to create wealth where you don't have to worry about money in the future, you're going to have to make some trade-offs. And so, I still see people now not necessarily using Money Smart system. In fact, our Facebook page where we talk about Make Money Simple again, there's a little survey that people get to fill in. And I was reviewing that recently. And I saw in there that a lot of people are like, what's the biggest problem? I don't know where all my money goes. And then are you using a money management system like Money Smarts? No. Well, what do you expect? What sort of outcome are you expecting to get? Now, what we have learned is the Money Smart system, when you combine it with Wealth Speed and Wealth Clock inside the More platform, it is a sophisticated money management system, right? And it requires very, very little effort if you run it properly. So, but I still see people like, are you using Money Smarts? No. Or, no, it's sort of not working for me or whatever. I go, all right, well, even though there's a need, obviously for some people, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And I just say to those people, all right, well, good luck. If you're not even setting yourself an annual surplus target in terms of what your income, then you're behind the eight ball in terms of actions and behaviors to get the results that you want to get to. So I'm really passionate about that, as you can tell, because it strikes me as, I knew it would be the case. I mean, I've talked about Paul Clitheroe's report for the federal government years ago, where 90% of people said they're okay at managing their money, and I don't really need any help. Well, the reality is that's just completely the opposite to the truth. But people continue to keep telling them their story, that, and reinforcing the story that they're okay at managing their money. Well, I couldn't disagree more strongly, because I see it in the evidence of every financial fact find that I see in households. There is wastage, there is slippage, there is no control, there is no system, there is no behaviour. Well, if you're going to make this a thing, if you're going to want to drive outcomes, you're going to have to change something. Otherwise, you'll get the same type of outcome.
100%. And I guess the money system too, Ben, is if you have a look under the bonnet of the Money Smarts, particularly, we were so excited back then, Ben. It was a couple of page download that you can go onto our website, give us your email address, and we'd send you the download and you just implement it. It's now a couple of hundred page book. Make Money Simple again. But we were so excited that we could give this out to people. But if you and just so you know, the book can be summarized in a couple of pages, Ben, because that's what we used to do. But if you look at it, it is ridiculously simple. It is painfully simple, right? So therefore, it cannot be It cannot be the complexity that people say it doesn't work, Ben. So if we go back to what we said earlier, it's just behavior stuff. Folks,
100%.
Money is just behavior stuff. But I promise you, we made the statement budgets don't work. What we meant is alone they don't work. They need a system to support it. We gave introduced a modern day JAR system, which was the Money Smarts, and we were super proud of that. So here's a couple of statements we made. Here are direct quotes from that episode, Ben, back in 13th of March 2015. You just said this earlier. The state of your wallet plays with the state of your mind. That has never been a truer word spoken. Running a household is like running a business. What? How can you say that? Our house is not a business. Well, financially, you got to treat it the same way because there's money in and there's money out, and you got to make sure there's a profit at the end, i.e. a surplus that you can start saving and put to work. And the third one here, this is from you, Ben. If you don't spend money on investing, you can't make it. You can't do nothing and expect your wealth base to grow. Wow. Look at that wisdom you had back then, buddy.
Well, it's just about taking action, but making sure that you set yourself up for success. So put some good systems in place and execute on those systems, and away you go.
Hey, mate, I reckon you should reflect on with pride, because when we were talking about the debt servicing debt scenario versus the cash flow, you were one of the pioneering conversations I had around that, because I've been in a big world of debt servicing debt at that point, and that's how I was building my portfolio. And you're like, no, and to your conservative nature, and from that little spring, that little green shoot, we now have there's heaps of people in the marketplace who are now focused purely on trapping surplus cash flow and putting that into their portfolio, and not having to rely on a increasing debt cycle for that to happen. And then there's a lot of people that have looked at what you've done and then tried to copy it for their own servicing with clients. So I think that you should take away a lot of pride from that, mate, from some of those early days of thinking about changing the nature and changing the paradigm of how we do this.
Well, thanks for that, mate. I appreciate that kind feedback. I mean, it's really simple that if you go through life and you see all these get-rich-quick schemes, and you see all these people trying to create wealth, whether through crypto or through share trading or whatever, the ones who are there's 1% of the people who are making all the money, a bit like network marketing or whatever it is in terms of Amways and all that, right? They're making all the rest of us aren't making the money. And so but it sounds easy, it sounds sexy. So all I just did was step back from that and say, well, you know what? I'm looking at the long-term players in terms of how they're doing it, and they're boringly predictable about their approach. And so my fear was that people would get into too much debt and they would get themselves into trouble. And so I just thought this is a more safer journey in terms of doing that, because again, I see these wealth creation strategies and all of that, and these tax effective strategies all come and go, thinking people get an edge. You don't need an edge. You just need to basically do what you said you were going to do, and just do it simply over a long period of time.
Be predictably boring is what I heard you just say, Ben. So, folks, that was just us summarising the first 3 episodes. We're going to do a little bit of this Throwback Thursday. There'll be another one before we go into summer series, and we'll do a bit more next year. But I've got to say I really enjoyed it, if I'm honest, just going a little trip down memory lane, but also just reinforcing my mindset minute that it's not about listening to the full catalogue and then just saying I've listened to the full catalogue. It's actually going, all right, here's 3 foundational episodes that I bang on at the end of every episode where I say, folks, go and listen to the first 20. We've just spent one podcast just refreshing some of the core concepts from those first 3 episodes, and hopefully our audience
maybe it's my turn to maybe I need to cut a new lap and have a look at those as well.
Well, mate, you're doing pretty well right now. Hey, folks, if you want to get your hands on the first 20 binge guide, which the Stiggy put together some time ago, and it's as I've been revisiting it, Ben, it's very timeless. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, so we're going to do, Ben, propertycouch.com.au/, you actually get the cheat code for the first 20 episodes. So I want to acknowledge the work that Stiggy did for that, and just suggest if you don't go and do that, folks, there really isn't an excuse, to be honest. Hey, I just want to do a little shout out before we move on to Lifehack.
Yes.
Too, Ben, is to the Stig, right? This podcast is very much about the Stig, but if we go back then, started on her handheld Samsung phone. Then it moved into you and I being in the studio, and we had separate mics on, so she had 2 tracks that she had to cut together, and we used to record it for those of you who are doing the YouTube, Ben's giving you the version of the first one there. For those of you who are not on YouTube watching this, you will not know what he just did. But the point is that she did that, and then we moved to the 2 tracks, and then she had to merge those tracks and bring it together and turn it around, Ben, in 4 hours. Remember that? She turned it around 4. Now, thanks to the pandemic, everything is online. The tracks are all merged. Our editing is at its core level so much more straightforward. But then our new team of Stigs then put together our YouTube production, which is, I've got to say, Ben, I think it's very impressive. But that's up to the people to decide. But there is some incredible viewing. If you like to watch better than listen, go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. But we're trying to make these resources timeless and evergreen so that you can get the content. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is around kids' bed routine, right? So just pause, maybe a moment's silence for all the parents who are listening to this going, gosh, we'd rather poke our own eyes out with a sharp stick than go into the bed routine. And it feels like it's getting harder and harder, right?
Yeah.
So here's a little hack that, thank you to my wife for this one, but we've got one of those old school tables, Ben, that we rehabbed. So we found this old, heavy wooden dinner table. And we sent it off to someone who turned it. We got it back, so it's got the timber on the top, and it's got the white legs and everything. It looks. My wife's done a great job, but it's super solid, right? Super solid. So what she did, she went to Kmart, and this is not a paid plug, Ben, just for the record. Yeah. She went to Kmart and got a table tennis package, right, which has this net that you can stretch, right? It's just got this retractable net that you can pack away super easy. Then you just clip it onto each side of the dinner table. So now the bed routine, because particularly my youngest, who's so active and just needs to keep moving, we play table tennis for 20 minutes on our dining table because we don't have a table tennis place. Yeah. And so now, and everyone's loving it. So we now set it up, 7:00 is when they get, showers and all that sort of stuff. And from 7:30 to 8, we can do whatever we want to do as a family just to wind down. And so they're now loving the table tennis and it's getting everyone active and involved.
Nice.
And it's making a difference getting them to bed, Ben. So that's why I'm thinking it's the Lifehack. So far, so good. We're about 2 weeks in and it's been amazing. So I figure all of the parents that are out there who don't have amazing dinner tables, Ben, because I don't think it's going to work if you've got this incredibly expensive
round one. Maybe we can have a 4-way. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but
yeah, well, you just might be able to create your own. We got wider wings and all that sort of stuff on the on each serve. But for those folks who are listening to this and they're in Toorak and they've spent a squillions on their table, right? Maybe not, but for the rest of it, who don't have very, very expensive dinner tables. There you go. Try that. It's working. Combine that with lying next to Jack when I'm putting to bed and get the chats. I'm starting to have a few wins, Ben. I'm starting to have a few wins. In what is, for those of you who don't have kids, you don't really know yet how torturous it is. But for those that you do have kids, trying to put them to bed.
Yeah, whatever your routine is, just stick to it. Set some rules up and stick to it because it's hard. Because their job is to break the rules.
Their job is to drive you mad.
Your job is to young teenage kids. Yeah.
Keep saying, Andrew, only 8 years to go. Youngest will be 18 then. All right, Ben, what's making property news?
Yeah, so Bryce, in terms of what's making property news, we're just going to pick up and finish off on the survey results that we got through the Pippa Sentiment Survey. And so in terms of last week's story, we talked about, in terms of the returns that people are looking for, what is the most important return. So we talked about that. But here's the why, the big why question, Bryce. So finish off in terms of, they're the returns, but why am I seeking those returns? So I thought I'd just read out to you in order of most popular. And so 1,541 people responded to this survey, Bryce. So the number one reason why people invest in property is to be self-funded in retirement without any reliance on government support. They want to pay their own way, Bryce.
Not to manipulate the tax system, take advantage of other people, all that sort of stuff. It's just to look after their own self-funded.
Unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, how selfish is that? To provide a better life financially for myself and my family was number 2. Oh, so 1,409 people voted for self-funded retirement. Number 2, 1,334 people voted for number 2. Number 3, Bryce, was to add to my retirement nest egg. So they just see it as an addition to their other activities. So 1,234 people voted for that. Number 4 was to retire earlier to have the options to work less. So getting their time back, the power of time, Bryce. 1,087 people voted for that one. Number 5 was, I like these next couple. Right?
Yeah,
I can't trust the government not to change superannuation rules or change higher taxes in my super. Yep. That's almost a given. 926 people will, and the others will wake up to that over the course of the next few years. Number 6 was to provide for my children. So that's pretty cool. 904 people responded to that. Number 7, governments won't be able to sustainably afford to fund the pension. Therefore, I don't want to rely on government for my retirement. So that was 57% of people responded to that one, 889. Number 8 was build financial legacy to pass on inheritance to my next generation. And number 9, which only 192 people basically said, Bryce, so I really like the people who fill in this survey, to become rich.
Yeah, the difference between that last one and the second last one, Ben, was about 600.
So 814 people said, build financial legacy. And, then the bot just drops out basically to 192 who are doing it to become rich. So
I think that should be double clicked, Ben, because if any, do you know the marketing and the people that all this, like here's a bunch of sophisticated, experienced investors, because the survey said that they're experienced.
Yeah, they're doing it.
They were altruistic aims that they were going for, not materialistic aims that they were going for, and only 192 people said, let's use that rich word. That's interesting. That's
compelling evidence.
That's
right.
powerful for people who hear that.
Yeah, and obviously to all our community who filled in that survey, that's also showing up in the data as well. So we appreciate everything you do and that's also helpful for us in our conversations with government and regulators in terms of why do they do this? Well, they do it so they're not a burden. They do it so they're self-funded. So they do it so that, they're in control of their future. Are these aspiring Australians who are basically, if it is to be, it's up to me, not relying on government. So a good story there.
Well said. All right, mate. I personally had a lot of fun today riffing with you on the past. Hopefully our audience can really lean into that mindset minute that I talked about before, that we just got to go a little bit deeper. It's not just exposure that we're after, actually after mastery. So hopefully we bridge the gap on a couple of those things. And hopefully for those of you that have been with us for a little while, Ben, they've done a lap or two, it's a refresher. For those of you who have joined the Property Couch movement later and they haven't had a chance to circle back, hopefully that was fundamental and foundational for you to reinforce your learnings, mate. But until next week.
Well, until next week, Bryce, we're going to keep learning how to try and get our episode under an hour. We sort of failed that. But just remember, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
I didn't think you'd notice, but well spotted. See you next week, folks.